everybody, Miss Curdy here for our lesson 6 lesson videos. You need 2 note sheets with you. So before we get started, let's fold both of those note sheets in half so that they are ready for us at the end of the video. All right, let's go ahead and get started. You can put the second page off to the side. You just need this one in front of you for now. So before we begin, let's take kind of just a quick moment to talk about some of the factors that we love to multiply by. So back in lesson 5, we worked on multiplying by 5 different factors, and those factors were really easy to multiply by. So some of the factors that we absolutely love are 0 as a factor, 1 as a factor, 2, 5, and you guessed it, 10. These 5 factors are really easy. We know anything times 0 is just 0. We know anything times 1 is just the other factor. We know that for our 2's facts, we can just think about our doubles facts for addition. Our 5's, we skip count by 5's, and our 10's, we can either skip count by 10's or that trick where we annex that 0 on the other factor. So these are really great factors that we know. Let's just take a quick review. We know that when we have 2 times 7 or 7 times 2, we're multiplying by 2. So I just double that other factor. 7 doubled is 14. Nice and easy. I know that 1 times any factor is just the other factor. So 1 times 9 or 9 times 1 is just 9. I didn't even put a 0 on here, as you can see, because it's so easy. We just know it's going to be 0. When we're multiplying by 5, I just skip count. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Nice and easy. And when I'm multiplying by 10, I just annex a 0 on that other factor. So 10 times 8 or 8 times 10 is just 80. And the reason why I wanted to talk about these 5 wonderful factors is because these factors can unlock so many other multiplication facts. So if we know these 5 facts, these 5 factors, we can actually solve so many other multiplication equations very simply. And that's what we're going to do today. It's one of my favorite tricks, one of my favorite properties for multiplication. Before we can do that, we first need to remember that a number can be broken up into 2 smaller numbers. So let's take a look. I know that a 3 can be decomposed into a 2 plus a 1. I know a 4 can be decomposed into a 2 and a 2. It can also be a 3 and a 1. And 6, we can decompose that a couple of different ways. Go ahead and see if you can pause the video and see how many different pairs of numbers you can come up with that when we add them up, they'll still equal 6. Go ahead and pause the video. All right, let's take a look. I know I can do a 5 plus a 1, a 4 plus a 2, and a 3 plus a 3. All of those will equal 6 when I put them back together. All right, so now that we know these 2 things, we know how to multiply by 2's, 5's, 10's, 1's, and 0's, and we know that we can break a number up into smaller parts. We are now ready to unlock a whole bunch of multiplication facts. And that brings us to lesson 6, where we're going to learn how to multiply by 3's, 4's, and 6's. And we're going to learn a new property. We already know the commutative property, where we can switch factors around. We know the 0 property. We know the identity property. And now it's time for my favorite one, the distributive property. Now, this is pretty tricky, and it does take practice, but it's totally worth it because once we get it down pat, we can then solve so many different multiplication equations. So over here on this side, we talked about breaking a number into 2 smaller pieces. The distributive property says that a multiplication fact can be broken apart into the sum of 2 smaller multiplication facts. So basically, we can take a big fact and break it up into 2 smaller factors. And then we add them together at the end, and we'll have the original product. So let's take this picture for example. We've got an array up here that will show a multiplication equation. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. So we've got the equation 6 times 3 or 3 times 6. And what we can do is we can take one of these factors and break them up into two smaller numbers. And if you take a look here, we still have the 6 on each side, but we've broken that 3 up into a 2 and a 1, just like we said we could do over here. And now I'm going to have two smaller equations. I've got a 6 times a 1, which we know very well, and a 6 times a 2, which we're also very good at. So let's take a look what it looks like in numbers. So we had that 3 times 6, and we're breaking that 3 up into a 1 and a 2. So we then end up with a 1 times a 6 and a 2 times a 6. So notice how that 6 stays the same the entire time, and that 3 is the number that is getting broken up into. And then when I solve it, I know that 1 times 6 is 6, and 2 times 6 is 12. And then it told me to find the sum of those. So I'm going to add them together. And I know that 6 plus 12 is 18. And what I've actually done is I've solved the equation 6 times 3, because I broke that 3 up into two smaller equations. So let's take a look at another example. So at this point, I expect people are saying, I kind of get it. We're not going to be pros at it yet. We're going to do some more practice. So stick with me. We've got this. So let's take a look at another equation. So here's an array, and I want to write the original equation. So I've got to do some counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my original equation is 4 times 5. Now in real life, I would not use the distributive property for this because I've got that 5 and I can just skip count. But let's pretend and actually break apart one of our factors. So the factor I want to break apart is the 4. And I want to think, what can I break a 4 up into? And when I look over here, I notice I can do a 2 and a 2 and a 3 and a 1. Now, I know that 1s are very easy, but a 3, not so much. When I see this 2 and 2, I know that this is going to be my best bet. So I'm going to break that 4 up into a 2 plus 2 and keep that 5 the same. So now I've got my broken factor here. When I put it back, it brings me right back to the original. When I want to find my two new equations, I know that this is going to multiply by 5, and so is this. So in this case, I've got a 2 times a 5 and a 2 times a 5. And I'm going to make sure I add them back together at the end. I know 2 times 5 is 10, and I know 2 times 5 is 10, and I get my final answer of 20. So I know that 4 times 5 is 20. So take a moment just to kind of look back. We had our original equation. We chose one factor to break up, and then we used those two new numbers to multiply by our other factor to come up with two new equations. We solved each one, added them together, and got our final answer. So again, at this time, I expect you to be saying, it kind of makes sense. Let's continue to practice. Grab your next sheet that we've already folded. So let's talk more distributive property. So here I've got another equation, 6 times 8. Now that's a big fact. We've talked about zeros, ones, twos, fives, and tens, but we haven't really learned the 6s and the 8s yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose one of these to break down. So I'm immediately looking at that 6 because I know a 6 can be broken down into a 5 and a 1. And that's like a dream factors because they're very easy for us. So now I've got my 5 and my 1, and I'm going to keep my 8 the same. So I've broken up one factor, kept the other one the same. Now I want to use these two new numbers that I've broken my 6 up into to multiply by that 8. So I've got my 5 and my 1. And again, my 8's going to stay the same. My 8's going to be in each equation. So now I've got a 5 times an 8 and a 1 times an 8. There's that mystery 6. It's got broken up, so it's still there. It's just hiding a little bit into my 5 times my 8 and my 1 times my 8. I can skip count to solve this, and I get 40. This is a piece of cake at 8. And when I add them together, I get 48. Let's take a look at this next one. Let's break up the 4 into a 2 and a 2. And we keep our 7 the same. I make my 2 new equations with my 2's, and I keep that 7 the same. And now I have a 2 times a 7 and a 2 times a 7. I know that those equal 14, and when I add them together, I get 28. So now I want you to take a moment to pause the video and break apart this 3 to solve 7 times 3. All right, let's take a look. I know I can break that 3 up into a 2 and a 1, and I'm going to keep that 7 the same. And now I'll have a 2 times and a 1 times 7 here. So 2 times 7 and 1 times 7, I've got 14 plus 7. And when I add those together, I get 21. So I know 7 times 3 is 21. So now let's think about this a little bit differently. Now I'm going to give us the broken up equation, and we want to bounce back to find the original. And the way I do that is I look at both equations and I see which factor stayed the same. And I see I've got a 6 in each. So I know we're multiplying by 6. I then look at the other 2 factors that have been broken up and I put them back together. 3 plus 1 is 4. So I know this equation used to be 4 times 6. Go ahead and pause the video, and if you can see if you can find the original equation to this one. All right, so in this case, I can actually think about it 2 different ways. I can say that the 2 stayed the same and that the 8's were added together to get a 16 times 2. Or I can say the 8 stayed the same and the 2's were broken up to make a 4 times 8. Either way, I'm going to get the exact same answer. All right, pause the video again and figure out this last one. What was the original equation? All right, when I look at this one, I see my 9 stayed the same. And if I take my 5 and my 1 and put it back together, I get a 6 times 9. And now I'm going to solve this one. 6 times 9. I know 5 times 9, if I skip count, I'll get 45 plus 9. And when I add that up, I get 54. And now I'm able to solve a large equation like 6 times 9 very easily using the distributive property. All right, at this time, you can either decide to have a small group lesson with your teacher, or you can hop up into your workbook, take a look at your student plan so you can see what pages you're going to be working on. And make sure you keep these notes handy. You're going to glue them in your notebook and then keep them with you so that you can look back and see what we had done. And that will help you with those workbook pages. Remember, the answer keys are posted on Google Classroom, and reach out to your teacher for any additional help. Have fun with the distributive property. It's one of my favorites. Have a good day, and I'll see you here next time.